L.J. Richards, the Assistant Director and Senior Curator, and our lecture tonight is on the ghost towns of Montana. Lee Solomon is going to be presenting this. Lee is the photo artist, that's it, at Deer Lodge, and the photographs you're going to see upstairs are your personal ones, aren't they? Yeah. Those are his personal ones. He's also a very good photographer as well as being a good photo archivist. And I'm going to let him finish the introduction.
I know more about me than you do, Jane.
Yes, that's true. And when I get up here like this, everything goes right out of my mind, including what I do. So if you'd give him a good welcome and enjoy.
Thank you very much for inviting me here tonight and showing up for this program. This is the first program I've given on Treasure State Remnants and Ghost Towns. I've given some programs on other exhibits. Let me give you a little background. I'm a chemistry and physics and mathematics instructor at Powell County High School. And during the day, I'm a science person. And when I go home at night, I'm a history and art person. I have these two parts to my personality. I suppose it goes right down the middle of my body. But I've always loved art since I was a little child. And science has been something that I've been well trained in and I enjoy doing. And in fact, science is a part of my craft of photography. So I think science and art kind of work together well within me. I love the wilderness, and I have done a lot of photography of the wilderness. And ghost towns were kind of a spin-off. My very first ghost town photography foray was at Bannock State Park, which, as you probably know, was the first capital of the territory of Montana and is now preserved as a state historic park. And my parents went with me, and I had a large view camera. I bought a 8 by 10 inch view camera in 1989 because of the fidelity of the size of the camera, which I had planned to bring tonight, but my tripod broke, and without a tripod you can't use a view camera, so I decided not to do that. But I went to Bannock with my parents who lived in Illinois, and I just started taking pictures of Bannock, and I thought, oh, this is really neat, and that kind of got me hooked. And so I've been taking ghost town pictures intermittently ever since, and it's becoming more and more of a passion. I would say that perhaps this year was the first year I've taken more pictures of ghost towns than of wilderness areas. So the program I'm going to give you actually have an outline. I remember my church minister when I was a young man said the three things a speaker should do. The first thing is you tell them what you're going to tell them. You tell them what you've told them. No, sorry. You tell them what you're going to tell them. You tell them, and then you tell them what you've told them. So here's what I'm going to tell you. I'm first going to review Montana's ghost town legacy, define it, and I'm going to then tell you the different types of ghost towns in my point of view. Then we're going to discuss the race against time. The ghost towns are on a collision course with history in that they're rapidly disappearing. And then some stray thoughts on ghost towns and the lives of our forebears. And after the formal part down here, we're going to go upstairs and look at the exhibit, and I'll tell you about some of the pictures. Now, I happen to have a few of the pictures here on the table, and as I discuss, I'll hold these up, but this is only 2, 4, 6, 9 images out of the 30 that are up there, 29 actually that are up there. And so we still have a lot of other things we could talk about. All right, let's begin with Montana's ghost town legacy. In general, I would say ghost town legacy is associated with the American West. I mean, throughout history, people have abandoned cities. I was just reading in my Discover magazine, I believe yesterday at lunch, that archaeologists are uncovering a magnificent city somewhere in the Middle East that, a few years ago they had no idea existed. And so the idea of abandoned towns or villages is not new, but I think the phrase ghost town conjures up the western town that probably flourished due to mining or perhaps due to cattle, but usually it was mining. And then when the mines played out, people moved on. So let me give you some definitions. Webster says a ghost is, quote, a mark or visible sign left by something dead, lost, or no longer present. And I love then the actual definition of a ghost town. That would be then an abandoned village or town that is at least in part still standing. In other words, there has to be some remnants left over, according to Webster. I like William Shakespeare's entry in my unabridged dictionary. He said, in relation to ghosts, a timely parted ghost of ashy semblance, meager, pale, and bloodless. Didn't Shakespeare have a way with words? Or we wouldn't be honoring him this many hundreds of years later, would we? Mary Hunter Austin, who was also a great writer in the 20th century about a variety of subjects, had this phrase, the ghost of grandeur that lingers between the walls of abandoned haciendas. I thought that was a really good phrase. All right, what kind of ghost towns are there? By the way, this is all of my own organization. I didn't get this out of any book. This is all my own creation, my own organization. And I'm sure quibbling could be done. There's nothing written in sand about this. I've broken it down into 4 types of ghost towns, and then actually a 5th category called non-town vestiges. Let's talk about what I think is the neatest type of ghost town, that is the one that's completely abandoned and it's 100% decayed. It has had no attempt made to try to preserve it. And we have a number of pictures in our show that that are taken at these completely abandoned and decayed ghost towns. And let's see, the first one is Glendale. And here's a smokestack of the mill at Glendale. And Glendale at one time was a city that had probably 100 or more buildings. And there's about 2 buildings and a smokestack left now. Another one is Emory, which is just out of Deer Lodge, and there's just a few tumble-down log cabins. Granite, this lady here in the front said she remembers the Miners Union Hall in Granite when you could go upstairs. It's pretty hard to go upstairs there now. I took this about 10 years ago, I think. Somebody torched it. So that's the way it goes. Comet. I've been twice to Comet, 2 weeks ago and 8 years ago. And I have some pictures upstairs in the display about Comet. Comet is pretty neat. There's a lot of structures still standing, and it's on a fairly decent Forest Service road. It's relatively easy to access, and there's a lot of buildings there, and there's a huge old mill. So if you're looking for a ghost town that you may not have been to, I would highly recommend Comet.
Where is Comet?
Okay, Comet is between Helena and Basin. If you follow Interstate 15 south of Helena, there's a Forest Service road or a road called High Ore Road, and it takes off at, I believe, Jefferson City. And it goes pretty much straight south and comes out near Basin on the Interstate 15. You can actually kind of like make a loop if you want. And I happen to have here the museum's copy. My copy is in my basement, or I forgot to bring it. But wasn't this nice of Jane to have this available? All on foam core, just like I had mine on foam core. Comet would be it's listed right there if you'd like to come up after the program and take a look. But it's fairly easy to access, and a public road goes through the middle of it. I have one picture upstairs relating to Comet. Coolidge is another one. Coolidge is owned by the Forest Service. It's open to the public. It's in the middle of the Pioneer Mountains. There's a road that goes through the center of the Pioneer Mountains from Wise River to, well, it comes out on a road that goes around to Dillon. And you have to walk about quarter to a half a mile from the parking lot, and the place is completely abandoned. Here is one of the structures that I understand used to be at Coolidge. It was called the Elkhorn Mill. And I had the privilege of walking through this mill in its entirety in about 1974 or 5. And it's my understanding it's completely gone now. I started taking ghost town photographs in 1991. Does anybody know more recent information about it?
That's what I heard too. We were up there one year and the creek was too high to get across, but the building was there, and I've heard that since then they've taken it out too.
What year was that?
We were there in probably late 80s, early 90s, and it was there then.
Yeah, my picture was taken in 1995. That would be 13 years ago. And it was already half collapsed here, and when I was there in 1974, the whole structure was intact, and it was awesome. There was all the mining equipment was in. Oh, it's just absolutely huge. Just huge. It was a monstrously large size. And while we're talking about that, here's actually a whole book devoted to that town. A man by the name of Mr. Allen put his whole fortune into basically creating a whole mill and village and operation. They even built a narrow gauge railroad for about 40 miles into the mountains to take the ore out. And it operated for a while and then went belly up and became almost an instant ghost town. So it's worth the trip. Castletown is another one of my favorites. I don't have a picture. Oh, yes, I do. Here's one of my favorite pictures. This is the boarding house, or perhaps a bordello, at Castletown. Castletown is near, it's way that way. White Sulphur Springs. And it's on private property, which reminds me, most of the time when I know that it's in private property, I try to contact the landowner ahead of time and give permission to go onto the property. That's a kind of a standard operating procedure that I have, and it's good advice for me to give you. I've run afoul several times. Would you like to hear my stories? Actually, I could just say 2 weeks ago was an example of things went astray. At Comet, I knew what it was like because I went there in 2000 and took some pictures from the road of their fabulous old hotel, and there's a nice picture upstairs of it. And I had arranged with people ahead of time to get permission from the owner. His name was Rusty Giulio, and I had some ladies from Boulder who had given history programs up there and knew the history, and were glad to show a photographer around and talk about it and get permission from the owner. And there's a fence up there. Part of the town is fenced off with barbed wire. And I said, can I get inside the barbed wire there and look at the structures? And he says, yeah, there's barbed wire there, fence, and you can go over on the other side. They've planted grass there, but it should be okay. So when we got there, the sign said no trespassing in this upper part of the camp, but the gate was open, so I went in into it. I hadn't been in there more than 2 minutes, and a guy, there's somebody that lives there. There's only one family, there's one building there occupied, and the man hollers at me. It was about 100 yards. I'm like, hey, can't you read the sign? Get out of there. So I backtracked out, and the lady who came with me from Boulder. We went down to his store and said we thought we had permission from Dusty Giulio, and he says he owns the lower part of the town. I own that part up above the fence. And the fence that Mr. Giulio was talking about was the fence cordoni, let's speak English, fencing off. Cordoned was the word I was looking for. Fencing off the mill. The mill had been the subject of an EPA cleanup, and they planted grass, and they had a big fence up to keep cows or anything out. And that was the fence he had referred to when we had asked. We didn't communicate well. So I thought I had permission to go into the upper part that was fenced off, and the real owner of the upper half, or the upper third of the ghost town said no, but he mellowed. He was a little course, upset because people frequently violate trespassing signs. And when I said to him about 5 times, I thought I had permission to be there. I normally don't go over a fence that says no trespassing. So he mellowed, and I gave him my card, and he gave me permission to go in there. And I didn't actually take my camera inside, but it's no fun being chased out of someplace. And another time, I photograph ghost towns now throughout the whole West. I've just started in the last 3 years going outside of Montana. And I was in Oregon, and there was a notable ghost town that was really a former lumber camp called Whitney, Oregon. And because most ghost towns are mining related, but this one was solely a lumber camp. And there was about 5 or 6 structures left, and I'd read about it in the ghost town books. And I went to a neighbor there. It had a fence and it said keep on. And I went to a neighbor and asked if I could go in there. And he wasn't the owner, but he says, yeah, it'll be okay. So I went in there and was photographing. The next neighbor down the road saw me and came roaring up in his four-wheeler and, what are you doing in there? But actually, when I saw him come, I thought what was going to happen. So I came out of the fenced area and I met him on the road and, what are you doing there? And I says, well, the man right here thought it would be okay. And so twice I've been accosted for being on the other side of the fence, but it is a good idea to either go to public ones or arrange permission to go inside the areas. And I'll talk about later, not too many minutes down the road here, about why landowners are the way they are. Another one that's pretty interesting is Coloma. I don't think I have a picture in the show here, but Coloma is above Garnett. And it's completely abandoned. It's all tumbled down logs. There are some roofs still over it. But it's a perfect example of what nature does to our structures over the time. It's about 100-year-old camp. Have you been to Coloma? I see you shaking your head.
Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting.
Last year they closed that up for going in there too, or the year before last.
That's not the case. I've been there twice in the last year and it was wide open. Now, the University of Montana had some excavations and archaeological projects they were working there. In fact, that's where I learned a lot about Coloma, is from the newspaper accounts of these students who were doing work there at Coloma from the University of Montana. But it's wide open. You have to know how to get there. If you don't, there's no signs on the road particularly. But it's really tumbled down. I thought it was pretty neat. Albright is another neat one. I guess my picture of Albright is upstairs. Albright is in the middle of Sluice Boxes State Park, perhaps Montana's most neglected state park. It's in the Belt Mountains near Nyhart, and you can hike in from either end. It's a strip of land along Belt Creek, and there used to be a huge mining operation in there. And I'll show you upstairs, but it's early 20th century, and it was pretty neat. For me, it's the most fun is to go to ones that are completely abandoned and in the state of decay. Another one is Lion City, which I happen to have a picture of. This is on private property, and this is a miner's cabin. It's in the east half of the Pioneer Mountains. You access this through Melrose and go eastward. And I guess I was a little bit sneaky. There was a sign down lower that says Lion City, keep out. When I got to a fork in the road, I went left because it said Lion City was straight ahead, so I went left. And then there were some four-wheel drive roads that went right. So I went right and I wound up in Lion City. So I really didn't violate the signs that said, stay out of Lion City. You won't tell, will you?
No.
And it's way too late after the fact, right? And it's an interesting collection of miners' cabins. And I didn't go up further because I thought I'm quasi-trespassing. And I think there's some mining remains further up, but I didn't do it. And I kind of like this picture. I'm trying to be more than just a recorder or a documentarian. I'm trying to be a, quote, fine art photographer. And I like this picture, and not just because of the cabin, but because of the mountain in the background. Another one is Lakeshore Mine, which I have a picture up there. It's on private property, and the Uptown Cafe in Butte has an owner who has a friend whose relatives own it, so we had permission to go there. And it, again, was a little community that popped up around a mining operation, because in the old days, transportation was very primitive and usually was higher up in the mountains, and it wasn't convenient to, travel long distances between a home and a mine. So they generally lived near their mining operations. There's probably a dozen or more cabins and buildings. The mill has pretty much fallen down and been stripped, but there were a couple of neat tanks and some neat buildings there still, so I took pictures of that. Another one is Sterling. Sterling was one I just visited a year ago. It's down near Norris, and it was a complete town. Now the only thing left is a mill, and let's see, can't remember if I have it in the show or not. No, I guess I don't, but yes, I do. I have a picture of one of the mills in that area. They built these huge, solid, massive structures for the mills. It's just incredible, the amount of money and labor that it was poured into old buildings, in my opinion. And Aldridge, I have not visited Aldridge, but I've seen it from the road. And when you drive to Yellowstone, it's about 2 or 3 miles before you get to Gardner. If you look across the river, it was a huge coal-producing town and station. I believe it was one of the larger coal-producing and mining districts in the United States 100 years ago. It's completely disintegrated, practically. There might be 1 or 2 cabins left. So anyway, completely abandoned and decayed. The second one is completely abandoned, but under what's called arrested decay, which is the historian's phrase for trying to keep it from sinking any more into oblivion. And that usually means several things: protecting the roofs and foundations, and I'll get into that here shortly. The 4 that I can list here are Bannock. How many of you have been to Bannock? Okay. You have to put roofs on it. You have to prop up get the foundations, keep them from rotting. Generally, you have to keep the windows secure, because any violation of a structure with water will eventually, of course, ruin it. How many of you have been to Garnett? Just down the road here, so you're all familiar with that. Coolidge is the town. Actually, I have Coolidge listed in 2 categories. I guess we would not say Coolidge is in the second category, so I'll scratch that out. Charter Oaks Mine, which is a mine between, not too far out of Elliston, between Elliston and Helena. And it's a whole mining operation that the Forest Service has preserved. And they're not open all the time, but if you call the Helena National Forest, they'll tell you when it's open, and you can walk through it. They have a ranger there to give tours, and you can go into an old mining building and look at the processes, and it's pretty interesting. So that's the second kind, completely abandoned but saved with, quote, arrested decay. So it doesn't degenerate any more than it already is. Third is what I call partially abandoned and then refurbished. This happens a lot in ghost towns. The population may not sink to 0, or even if it does, people will move back, because most towns are private property unless a state entity purchases it, or a city. And so one way or another, people in the last, say, 30, 40 years have developed an appreciation of ghost towns, and the landowners start moving back and spending this maybe a few weeks or the whole summer there. And of course, they want their amenities. They would like to have either electricity wired in or a generator, and there's satellite dishes, and they paint their house because, we don't want our house to look bad. So pretty soon an abandoned town has a spiffed up look. And here are the examples that I give would be Elkhorn. Elkhorn has these 2 buildings, which are owned by the state of Montana. How many of you have been to Elkhorn? It's over past Boulder and southeast of Helena. But the rest of the town is privately owned, and there are a number of people living there, especially in the summer, which has its advantages. Vandals won't tear the place apart when people are living there. But they do tend to fix things up, which goes counter to the draw of the town in the first place. Pony, Montana. Pony perhaps shouldn't rightly be called a ghost town, but it has some pretty neat buildings in it. it's east of, well, on the road, it's hard to say. I mean, it has a post office. It's usually on the, whoops, it's usually on the ghost town maps. No, they've decided not to. Well, I was just there, and there's a really neat old mill there, and an old bank building, and an old mercantile that I thought were pretty fascinating. Another one in this category would be Rimini and Marysville. I was just at Marysville last Saturday, 6 days ago, and a number of people live there, but there's still a lot of neat old abandoned, decaying structures there. So you've got your completely abandoned and decayed and going to be gone in a few more decades. You've got your completely abandoned but preserved from further decay. Then you have your partially abandoned and or lived in and refurbished. And I put in a fourth category, which technically means it's not a ghost town if you go by Webster, because he said it's an abandoned town or village that is at least in part still standing. Some ghost towns are completely gone. There is not any vestige left at all. And there are a number of examples of that. Diamond City, which is east of Helena, Beartown, which is at the mouth of Bearmouth here on Interstate 90, and Cinnabar, which was the railroad depot and little community that served Yellowstone Park for a couple of decades until the railroad line was pushed to Gardner. The people who own land in Gardner refused to sell it at a good price to the railroad, so the railroad stopped about 2 or 3 miles short of Yellowstone and started their own little town called Cinnabar. And then they stagecoached the passengers or the tourists to Yellowstone. And then when they finally got land and a terminal at Gardner, then Cinnabar disappeared. Then lastly, non-town vestiges. I have in although my subtitle is Montana Ghost Towns, my title is Treasure State Remnants, and there have been a number of places of historical note that represent abandoned or foregone economic processes of our forebears, and I can give you some examples here. I have a sheep herder's cairn. I started taking these a few years ago. Powell County has apparently a number of fine examples of these rock cairns that sheep herders would build for a variety of purposes. Actually, they're all over Montana. These were built by sheep herders to probably occupy their time, maybe to mark boundaries, to commemorate their presence. How many of you have ever seen one in the hills? Have you? Any theories or thoughts on them?
My dad always told me that the old sheep herders built them to help as landmarks.
As landmarks? Right, okay. How about you, ma'am?
When I was in the Bob, I saw.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
I was along the White River.
Okay.
Where the two White Rivers come together and then went on to I think it was the Flathead in there. But I remember seeing one of those. I can't exactly remember where, but somewhere between where the two rivers came together and where we went.
Uh-huh. This one is especially unusual. It's two-tiered. Normally the cairns are just cylindrical or pyramid or conical, whereas this one has 2 diameters, and somebody put a very old cross on it and wired it up there. I think that wood has to be 50 years old or more, so I think it's original to one of the sheep herders. Powell County and Montana used to have millions of sheep, and now we're down to, I think, 1/3 of a million or so the last time I saw a statistic. Okay, another thing that I photographed was cemetery monuments or markers. This is in Elkhorn. It's kind of like, as long as I'm there, I'll take them. I look for interesting monuments. This is Beatrice and Clara, I don't see, children of W.J. and S.J. Roberts. It's a very poignant story. They were one of them was 3 years, 6 months, 14 days old. The other was 5 years, 7 days old. They died 4 weeks apart. This was in 1889, of course, from childhood diseases that we can immunize our children against now. A lot of cemeteries have very young children. There's one at Glendale That's the community for which this is one of the main remnants. There's a triple gravestone, a triple monument marker to 3 children that died within a short period of time. That is grief.
Might have been the measles epidemic.
Probably, yeah. Can you imagine losing 3 children in one epidemic?
As I recall, in that Elkhorn Cemetery, you just walked through and realized how many children died of that epidemic. It
Yes.
is really poignant.
Yes. And by the way, I have a leveling bubble on my camera. The camera was level. That's true for a view camera. I had hoped to bring my view camera, but my tripod broke, so got out of that. Another thing, of course, are standing isolated mining mills. Sometimes there are mills just out in the middle of nowhere and there's no settlement near them. The Marietta Mill is one of those, and I'll show you that upstairs. Here's one of my more favorite places is the OTO Dude Ranch. There's a noted book out on the OTO Dude Ranch. This was the most successful of the early Montana dude ranches, and it fortunately is in the public domain. The Forest Service owns it, and it's not too far it's 10 miles north of Gardner. And this is a dude's cabin. They have a main lodge there that's still intact, and I have another picture up there of one of the ornamental ironworks on the porch of that dude ranch. I can't remember the title. Jane, do you remember the title of the book on the OTO Dude Ranch? Something about music, flapjacks, and something.
Yeah.
Dudes at the OTO Dude Ranch. I have a copy of it. Another thing that I take photographs of are dredges, gold dredges. Most of them were abandoned in 1942 because the government put out an order that no non-essential mining was to be tolerated. Everything was to be put into the war effort, and gold was not needed apparently for the gold effort. So all the dredges that I've been aware of that were abandoned in 1942 or prior to that. There might have been a few that started up later, but I find abandoned gold dredges pretty interesting because of their massive operation. And it's not hard to know where they were. They ruined the landscape with their tailings piles behind them. I have 1 or 2 pictures upstairs of it. Moving on.
I just wanted to
Yes.
say, it's amazing with the equipment and everything. A lot of it is heavy, like, and
Yeah.
I came from the gold country in California, where Coloma is. And I rode horses all over that area, and there's lots and lots of these gold mines and there. But that's what always threw me was the big stamp mills and everything. They hauled all those
I know.
up the side of a mountain.
Yeah, like with 20 mules or more to haul a set of stamps up there. It's just incredible what they did to create the economic viability of mines and mills. There's a resident in Deer Lodge who has a series of about 20 or 25 photographs of them actually building one of the dredges. You built those right on site. You didn't move them in. You dug a pond, and then you literally built the boat there, and a dredge is basically a boat, and just then got it to working. And it floated in its own pond. It floated wherever you dug. So it was just like an entity unto itself. And they were monstrous in their sizes and in their weight. Moving on to part 3, the race against time, or the inexorable forces of decay, vandalism, recyclers, lawyers, and the Environmental Protection Administration. Doesn't that sound cute? Let's talk about why we have to race against time. If you don't have, as I mentioned before, roofs and windows and foundations, your building is going to go. I was at Comet 2 weeks ago, and the superintendent's house, I walked inside. I don't generally go inside houses because of the safety issue, and a lot of landowners are really afraid of that. But the roof looked pretty much intact, or sufficiently intact from the outside. When I got on the inside, I could see that the windows and the roof were not secure. And the rot from the weather, the snow, the rain, and the wind was incredibly rapid because it probably had been abandoned less than 50 years, or about 50 years ago. And the water inside was just ruining the place. Everything was peeling off the walls. The floors were half gone. So if you don't keep the water out, you can kiss it goodbye. I have a picture up in the exhibit of a barn that literally sways like a saddle. And it's on the Fitzpatrick Ranch, which the Powell County Museum and Arts Foundation just gained jurisdiction to a couple of years ago. And I did some documentary photography there. And I decided to include it in my show. And this barn, I bet it's from the vertical, the middle of the swayback beam, is probably 5 feet below where it was. I just found out from the director that they're planning on refurbishing it and putting a new roof on it. Well, once the water gets into any of the beams, it's going to decay and start giving it away. If you go to Coloma, that's a perfect example of how the roofs give away. Bricks, metal, and stone easily outlast wood and tar paper. So for me, going to places that have stone structures is really fun because a lot of it's going to be there unless it's deliberately torn down. And which does often happen, especially if it's brick. People love to take the bricks and build their brick fireplace. However, wood is just as susceptible to vandals and thieves because people love to have barnwood on their interior walls in their living room or playroom or wherever. So wood tends to disappear, but certainly bricks and stone and metal hold up against the elements a lot better. I think there's a mill picture at Sterling that I took last year. That's a fantastic building, and it was built in 1864. I'm sure they must have stripped the roof off for the wood and the materials and, of course, the machinery inside. But it's just fascinating to see the care that people took 150 years ago almost, 140 some years ago to create these mills. Snow loads are real important. The higher up you go, the heavier the snow load on them. The wind is a very potent factor in ruining structures. At Comet last 2 weeks ago, the mill there had a huge section of the roof about the size of this floor. This whole section of the roof was gone. And there was a piece just about that same size, about 20 feet away on the roof. So I'm postulating that the wind just zipped it over like that. Don't discount ultraviolet. Do you know what ultraviolet does to your paint job at home or your deck, don't you? Well, just put ultraviolet on wood and tar paper shingles and or wood shakes. I've got some really neat pictures of 100 nails on a roof and maybe 1 or 2 of the shingles are still there. Ultraviolet is extremely destructive. And then there's the human agents of destruction. Vandals, like I said, who burned the Miners Union Hall at Granite. The recyclers that I've talked about who love the bricks and the wood. The lawyers. Attractive nuisance is a legal philosophy that says if you leave a place that's interesting to somebody and somebody goes in there and gets hurt, then you're at fault for leaving an attractive nuisance available to them. So that's why landowners will put, stay out, or they'll fence ghost towns. And you can't blame them because lawsuits can be expensive to defend against. And then there's the EPA with their cleanups. And of course, it is important for these cleanups to take place. I was at an abandoned mine called the Big 7 mine in the Belt Mountains near Nyhart. And there's acid water running right out of the mine, right through the main area and then down the hillside. You can't blame Americans and the EPA for cleaning up these terrible residues of the mining era because they're poisoning streams, they kill fish. But they inevitably come in and pretty much redo the landscape, and if they have to push buildings around or down, that's the way it goes. And it doesn't look like it used to much unless they're really careful, like they were at the mill at Comet. And actually at Hughesville, they left some of the buildings there. But if the building has to go to reclaim the place, it's going to go. Lastly, stray thoughts about lives from our forebears. I think ghost towns are part of our love of history, and it's a form of ancestor worship. It makes me realize how isolated these towns were. I mean, how would you like to live at 6 or 7 or 8,000 feet with horses and or Model Ts for transportation? No fresh food very often. I mean, just think of the privations that these people lived under in these towns. Think of how hard it was for food and warmth, chopping your firewood, trying to can or preserve your food for the long winters. Death from disease and accidents. I have a picture upstairs of a miner who was killed in the mines at Lion City, and it's kind of poignant. The insecurity and uncertainty of life is just so pervasive, I think, in ghost towns, and it really makes you appreciate the security and healthfulness of our modern life. I'd like to finish by reading a couple of quotations here, taken out of a ghost town book. Let's see if I had listed it. Yes, it's called Ghost Trails Country by Florence Riddle Johnson. It's about the mills around Anaconda, Montana, and the hills there. She said, "Far be it for anyone to want to live in the past, for that, even for elderly people, is a sign of decay. But to look at the past, to reminisce about the struggles, triumphs, griefs, and joys of the people who passed before us is a pleasurable pastime. So it is when we browse among antiques and touch the chairs, tables, dishes, and claws, or equipment that our ancestors handled so many years ago. It gives us a kinship, and to many of us, a thankfulness for our progress. We get the same feeling when we wander through a ghost town, or travel on a trail, or study an object that people in the past have lived in, trod, or used. We experience a childlike joy in the contact, such as a youngster gets who listens to stories that great-grandparents tell, or when we see programs that give us flashbacks of bygone days." And I thought that lady really expressed it quite well. Carl Sandburg said, "If America forgets where she came from, if people lose sight of what brought them along, if she listens to the deniers and mockers, then will begin the rot and dissolution." And my final quote is by Daniel Burstein. "Trying to plan for the future without a sense of the past is like trying to plant cut flowers."
Oh, I just read that.
You're rootless, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yes.
I just read that in an article where they were saying how sad they are that children are not taught history the way they were years ago.
Yes.
And exactly that quote.
Right. You have to understand the past, make intelligent decisions about the present and your future. Shall we go up and look at some papers? You've been a
Did you,
good audience here so far.
Have you looked at places right outside of Phillipsburg?
No, I haven't. Elkhorn, and I was told by a ghost town friend that it's been torn down. It was an old saloon. It actually says saloon right on it. That's a very, I think, classic old frontier, false-fronted building. I think that's one of my favorite images in my collection. Of course, we've talked about the sheep herders landmark, and I've still got some more to find. I have a lady in Deer Lodge who has written a fine article about it and knows where some more are, and I'm going to talk her into taking me there. I had a landowner take me to this one on private property who had the keys to all the gates. This is at Hughesville. This is in the Belt Mountains. Quite a few structures are still left there. This is a gold dredge that's near Deer Lodge, near Gold Creek. And you would have to, actually, it's pretty big, but actually I've seen bigger ones. It is really big, but they've made some monstrously large size ones. This is hidden. It's kind of like, even though it's on private property, if you know where it is, you can go there. There's no signs prohibiting you.
Is it near Gold Creek where Camp Maker Beam is?
Yes, it's in that area,
Yeah.
right. This is in Albright. This is in the middle of sluice boxes, and you have to hike to get to it. There's this whole mining community here. I think I have in my show an ore car. Do you see a picture of an ore car here? Here, oh, it's right here below it. staring right at it. This ore car was one of the ores that they used to haul material around it, Albright. This is the Emma Darling, which is a mine dump, our transfer holding chute near Deer Lodge. Just happened to notice it one day, and I thought the way all the sticks pointed out was kind of artistic. This is on public property now. This is on the Forest Service land, about a mile or two above Glendale. And the Forest Service has put a fence around it to keep cows out. I don't know how many kilns are there, probably 6 or 7. And it's well preserved, and there's some interpretive signs. It's a really neat place to go to. It's a very fine collection of charcoal kilns. They would harvest the wood above it on the mountains, slide them down, start the wood on fire in here with very little oxygen and burn the moisture away, and then the charcoal left over would be very rich in energy per pound and was used in the mining processes.
Is that like the one, there's a kiln, or like a kiln down in Hamilton at the fairgrounds down there?
I have not seen that one.
Yeah.
Probably
They
so.
have been- When they had the fair on, they've actually had a fire going in there.
Probably is the same idea. This is a huge dredge called the Peggy on private property near Ennis. And this, of course, we talked about was the remains of the Miners' Union Hall. It's a shame that structure bit the dust. My ghost town friend remembers as a child his grandfather worked in Granite when it was a booming city. And when my friend was a little kid, he remembers going in there, and there was the pool table was still there, and you can go upstairs to the meeting room and everything. Here's the stack at Glendale, which I showed you down below. Elkhorn, or the Lion City cabin. I just love the way the mountain in the background there. And this is Lakeshore Mine, probably 20s or 30s, abandoned in the 40s. This is a very old mill. This was built in the 1860s above Virginia City. And there are a number of people who are preserving it. I'm pretty sure it's in private property, although they might have given it to the Forest Service. And they're preserving it so it doesn't decay anymore. It's called Christinaut. This is in Bannock, and I kind of like the way the false front of the building is shown there. And I believe that's a sod roof, too. It's kind of neat. And this is in the OTO Dude Ranch. This is on the front porch of it, and I just like the way they built that to make it remind dudes from the east of, the ornaments on buildings in the East Coast. This is that barn I told you about that, water has weakened the central beam and it's about ready to collapse. And so our museum is going to get some money to preserve the barn by tearing off the roof and putting a new roof on. But to me, this was a neater barn, even though in a while it won't be a barn. And the OTO Dude's Cabin. I highly recommend you, if you can at all hike a mile or so and a couple hundred feet up, it's really neat to go to this old Dude Ranch. It was very, very famous and very much appreciated by the dudes in the 19-teens and 20s. The Depression killed most of these old dude ranches. And we've talked about this monument. Here's the one from a miner who was killed in a mine. It says here, "Our dear boy sleeps in peace. Lou Hugh, Huee, born in Danville, Illinois." I used to work in Danville, Illinois for a few days. And that sounds bad. Okay. They were building, I attended the University of Illinois, and I was in the astronomy department, and they were building a radio observatory in Danville, and I went and helped put in the installation for 2 days. And it says he was born there in 1856, accidentally killed in Lion Hill, Montana, April 21st, 1880. And then there's 4 lines there, and I've given the translation. "Weep not, dear parents, disturb not thy rest. Jesus has called me, he thought it best." I love going to old cemeteries. When I was on a ghost town trip last summer to Nevada and Utah and California, we found a cemetery in Frisco, Utah, that had so many of these inscriptions in them that while I was photographing, I gave my wife a tablet of paper, and she filled 3 pages with these poignant inscriptions that they used to put on gravestones. I'm going to write an article on that someday. The gravestones of Frisco, Utah. Will you buy a copy? I bet you all know what that is.
Yeah.
That's the Methodist Church at Bannock. And this is up above Virginia City. There's a mill that probably shut down 50 or 60, 70 years ago, and they have a Chilean roller in there. This big thing rolled around and crushed the ore. Isn't that incredible? And this is the gold coin mill, which was visible from the highway between Anaconda and Georgetown Lake, and it is no longer. The owner wanted to tear it down. I'm not sure why, for the wood or for safety reasons, liability. But this mill is gone, and it's a real crying shame. It had this beautiful trestle that came in on one side and went out the other. It was a fantastically neat structure. It's all gone. And this, of course, is the mill we spoke of in Elkhorn, and the Elkhorn Mill in Coolidge. The whole thing is gone now. And here is the Midas Mill. There's actually 2 little communities within a half a mile of each other, Sterling and Midas. Technically, they were separate communities, but they probably socially merged together. And I just love studying these rock structures. Look at the workmanship that went into building that gold mill in 1860 something. And second to last here is this the stone structure at the edge of Pony, Montana. I think these stone structures are just monuments that amaze me. And you know what's something funny? The other side of this mill has a big pasture, and it's barbed wire fence and keep out, no trespassing. And I tried to find the owner and get permission or a caretaker. Nobody could let me in there. The back side of this is completely open. So I just went around the other side. I thought my whole day and 100 miles of travel were for naught, and all the gas. And the other half of the mill, the other side of the mill was completely open. So I got a picture. And lastly, this is the Marietta Mill up above Virginia City in Alder Gulch. Alder Gulch is hiding a lot of old structures because it was very rich in gold. And this is completely made out of wood. I had to really back up to get a picture of it. Well, I've chatted for 58 minutes, and I appreciate your attention and hope you've enjoyed it, and I'll be glad to take individual questions or comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Pictures are beautiful.
As a little footnote here, I made all of these frames. These frames were actually made, if you want to be technical, in Missoula, Montana. Burnage Frame and Molding has been my picture framing supplier for almost 30 years. And they milled this wood. This is Jatoba. It's called Brazilian cherry. And I've put a dark stain on it. It normally is lighter than this. And the owner of Burnage Frame and Molding and I designed the curve, and they routed it. And then I've done all the cutting and assembling and the staining and the finish work. I love woodworking. In fact, I was just at Superior Hardwoods today drooling over some hardwood there that I may buy for my next picture frame set. So, then I did all the matting and framing, and I like to write the history of it all. So,
Very nice.
thank you.
It's really good, yes.